My stepmother kicked me out. My father watched the backyard and stayed silent. I was 22 with $43 to my name. I took my bag and left. 5 years later, I saw her in a lobby. For a few seconds, she had no idea who I was. Her name was Patricia, my stepmother. My father had married her 4 years after my mother died, when I was 14, and my grief was still the shape of a person, visible, present, occupying space in the house in a way that I think made Patricia uncomfortable from the beginning. She had 2 daughters from her first marriage, Haley and Brooke, who were 17 and 15 when they moved in. They were the kind of girls who had grown up in a world where things were arranged to their comfort, and the rearrangement required by our household, by my presence in it, by my mother's photographs, by my bedroom with its posters and its smell of the person I had been before Patricia arrived, was not something they absorbed graciously. My father is not a bad man. I want to say this clearly because it is a complicated thing to say, and I want to say it anyway. He is a man who loved my mother and lost her and was afraid of being alone and married Patricia because Patricia made him feel less alone. And somewhere in the transaction of that marriage, he had allowed himself to slowly vacate his role in my life to keep the peace in his house. This is not a good thing, but it is a human thing, and I have spent enough years with it to understand it without having to call him a villain. Patricia's version of events, the one she told her friends and eventually told people at my father's church, and told anyone who would listen, was that I was difficult, that I was resentful of their happiness, that I had made the household tense with my attitude and my unwillingness to accept the new family, that she had tried, genuinely tried, and I had refused to meet her halfway. I want to tell you what actually happened plainly. For 4 years, I had made my own meals when she made dinners that did not include my dietary restrictions, which she knew about and forgot regularly. I had stayed quiet when she redecorated my mother's garden with plants my mother would not have chosen. I had said nothing when she moved my mother's photographs from the living room to a box in the garage, citing the need to refresh the space. I had done my own laundry since I was 15 because she had made it clear that the family's laundry was done by her daughters and her husband and that I could manage my own. I had been for 4 years. As small and as quiet as I could make myself in a house that was no longer oriented around me, because I understood instinctively that making myself smaller was the price of being allowed to remain. The argument that ended everything started over a financial aid form. I was applying for colleges, the first in my family to go, which had once been a point of pride in a different version of our household. The FOFSA required information about household income, and I needed my father's tax documents to complete it. I had asked him twice over 2 weeks. He had said he would get them to me. He had not gotten them to me. The deadline was approaching. I asked Patricia where my father kept his tax documents. I was not aggressive. I was not rude. I asked because the deadline was 3 days away and I needed the documents. She told me that I had some nerve going through their private financial information, that I clearly had no understanding of appropriate boundaries, and that my attitude in this house had been a problem since day one. This last part is the sentence that I have replayed most often over the years because it is the sentence that revealed the reality I had been avoiding. The problem had never been my attitude. The problem had been my existence in a space she wanted to be entirely hers. My father came home in the middle of this. I told him what I needed. Patricia told him what I had done in her version. He stood in the kitchen looking between us with the expression he always wore when the house was in conflict, a kind of pained withdrawal, a wish to be somewhere less uncomfortable. He said he would think about the best way forward. That evening, Patricia told me that it would probably be better for everyone if I found somewhere else to stay while I figured out my next steps. She said it as if it were a practical suggestion. She said it in the voice she used when she was framing a decision she had already made as a mutual consideration. My father, by the kitchen window, said nothing. I had my phone, my duffel bag, and $43. I called my best friend from high school, a girl named Tamara whose mother I had always liked, and I told her what had happened in as few words as possible because I did not have the emotional bandwidth for more than the minimum. Tamara said I could stay on their couch for a while, which I did, for 2 weeks, until I could see that the couch was creating a strain on the household that I did not want to be responsible for, the way an unplanned guest always does, even in the kindest homes. I called my mother's sister, my Aunt Rosalind, who lived 3 states away and who had sent me birthday cards every year since my mother died. She was sympathetic and genuine and told me she wished she could help, but her own apartment barely fit her family and she was sorry. She was so sorry. I called 2 classmates, Neither situation worked out. One did not answer. One answered and said she wished she could help and then had not said anything more. I spent 2 nights in my car, which was a 2009 Civic that my father had bought me for my 16th birthday and which was technically in his name. A fact I was aware of, and which created a particular type of anxiety about how long I could rely on it. Those 2 nights in the car, parked in a lot I knew was well lit and reasonably safe, taught me things about human need that you do not learn any other way. The specific discomfort of sleeping without being horizontal. The particular quality of morning when you wake up in a car and understand that today you have to figure out the same things you figured out yesterday, and the solutions have not improved overnight. I was not angry those 2 nights. I want to say this because I think people expect anger, and the honest answer is that I was not angry. Not primarily. I was something colder and more focused than anger. I was in problem-solving mode, the mode you enter when the situation is serious enough that feelings have to wait because feelings are not going to find you somewhere to sleep. I found a shelter that accepted young women, which I stayed in for 10 days while I looked for work, any work. The kind that didn't require experience I didn't have, the kind that would start immediately. I found a diner that hired me on the spot for the morning shift. I found a second job 3 days later, answering phones at a storage facility on weekend evenings. I was working both jobs when the call came. The call came through the shelter's network. They had a connection with a placement service that matched workers with households needing domestic help. The coordinator at the shelter, a woman named Ms. Eubanks, who wore bifocals on a beaded chain and who had, I suspected, heard every version of every story that could bring a young woman to her door, called me into her office one afternoon and said she had something she wanted to discuss. The family's name was Holloway, Gerald and Catherine Holloway. He was in commercial real estate. She ran a foundation of some kind. They lived in a house in North Raleigh that Ms. Eubanks described as substantial, and they needed a live-in housekeeper, someone to manage the daily operations of the household. The cleaning and laundry and some light cooking and errands, room and board included. A salary I could save because my living expenses would be covered. It's not glamorous, Ms. Eubanks said. She said it looking at me over the bifocals in the way she looked at things she was assessing honestly. But it's stable and it's legal and it comes with a reference from people who are well connected in the city. If you do the job well and you don't cause problems, it opens doors. What kind of doors? I said. Depends on what you do with what you learn in there, she said. I did not know what she meant by that yet. I said I would take the job. The Holloway house was the kind of house that requires a category of its own if you have never been inside one. Not a mansion in the dramatic sense. No gates, no fountain, nothing that announced itself from the street as extraordinary. But once inside, the ceilings that went up and kept going, the kitchen that had more equipment than the diner where I worked. The living room with its actual art on the walls that I would later learn was actual art in the sense that it had provenance and value, not prints from a home goods store. I had a room in the back of the house, off the kitchen hallway, with a twin bed and a dresser and a window that looked out on the garden. It was clean and quiet and entirely mine, which was more than I had had in 6 weeks, and I sat on the edge of the twin bed the first night and felt something I could only call relief, which is different from happiness, but which felt in that moment like the more important of the two. Catherine Holloway was 47, precise in the way of women who have organized their lives by specific standards and who notice immediately when something falls short of those standards. She showed me the house on my first day in the particular way people show their houses when they want you to understand the scope of what is expected, quickly enough that you cannot ask questions, thoroughly enough that you cannot claim ignorance later. She handed me a typed document, 2 pages, outlining my responsibilities and the household schedule. She said she would answer questions during the first week, but expected me to be independent after that. I like things done a specific way, she said. I understand, I said. Tell me the specific way, and I'll do it that. She looked at me for a moment. I think she expected some version of deference in my response and got something else. Not attitude, just straightforwardness, which seemed to briefly interest her before she moved on. The first week was the hardest kind of hard, which is the kind where you cannot tell anyone how hard it is because you need the job and you are not in a position to have feelings about how hard it is. The house was large. Catherine Holloway's standards were exacting. I was 22 years old and I had never professionally cleaned anything in my life, and I was learning everything at the speed the job required, which was faster than comfortable. I cleaned bathrooms in a house where the bathroom fixtures cost more than my father's car. I did laundry for people who owned clothing I had to look up online to understand how to care for. I polished surfaces and vacuumed rugs and organized refrigerators according to a specific system that Catherine had explained once and expected to be maintained permanently. The first night that I got everything done to standard, and Catherine walked through the house doing her check and did not find anything to correct. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, and I said out loud to no one, "Okay, that was all. Just okay." But I meant it the way you mean something when you have cleared a bar you were not entirely sure you could clear. Within 3 weeks, I had the routine so completely mastered that I could execute it on autopilot, which freed up the part of my brain that had been focused on learning to start doing something else. The house ran on a schedule that Gerald Holloway was the least aware of. In the way that people who live in well-organized environments are often the least aware of the organization that makes them possible. He left at 7:45 in the morning and returned at 6:30 or 7 in the evening. He moved through the house leaving a specific kind of trail. Glasses on the wrong table, jacket over the wrong chair, files spread across the dining room surface he used as an overflow office that I learned to anticipate and correct so seamlessly that he never had occasion to think about it. Catherine's schedule was more variable. She had meetings, lunches, events for the foundation, sessions with contractors about various projects. She was a woman who moved through the world with a complete absence of hesitation, which was something I noticed about her early and which I found instructive in ways I could not have articulated at the time. They had one son, a college student named William, who was at UNC and who came home on breaks and who was the least complicated person in the house. He was pleasant, moderately self-sufficient, and treated me with the automatic decency of someone who had been raised to treat service workers like people. This was not universal in the houses I later learned about from the placement service network. It was not even universal in the Holloway house. But from William, it was consistent, and I respected it. The Holloways had a social life that brought other people through the house regularly. Dinner parties, cocktail hours, the kind of weekend gatherings that required me to work on what would otherwise have been my time off. I learned to be present without being visible, to move through a room of people who were talking and laughing, and to be the person who refreshed the serving dishes and collected the used glasses, and was not, from the perspective of the guests, a person in the room who needed to be reckoned with. This is its own kind of education, not a good kind in the sense that it should not be necessary, but an educational kind in the sense that you learn things about power and visibility, and who counts in a room when you have been placed definitively in the category of who does not. I started paying attention to different things about the 4th month. The first 3 months, I had been paying attention to the work, to the standards and the schedule and the methods, to getting everything right and building the reliability that was my most important professional asset. By month 4, I had the work internalized and my attention shifted. I started paying attention to how Gerald Holloway worked. He had an office in the house, a room I cleaned every Monday morning while he was at work, and his office was a room where a person who was serious about money had built a thinking environment, not ostentatious, organized in a specific way, with files that had actual systems and bookshelves that were not decorative. I cleaned that room carefully, and I noticed what was on those shelves: real estate development, financial analysis, city planning, books about negotiations and market cycles and the economics of urban growth. Not the kind of books people put on shelves because they look good, the kind of books where the spines are cracked and the margins have pencil marks. I started requesting books from the library when I had my days off. Not the same books. I would not have been able to understand most of them yet, but the surrounding knowledge, the context, the vocabulary of the world those books described. I had time on Sunday afternoons and Thursday evenings, and I spent it reading, at first with a dictionary open beside me because the language was not mine yet, and then with less and less need for the dictionary. I paid attention to Catherine Holloway's phone calls, not in the invasive way she made calls in private, but to the patterns of her schedule, the way she structured her days, the efficiency with which she moved from one thing to the next, without the kind of diffuse energy loss I had observed in people who did not manage their time with intention. I paid attention at the dinner parties, in the way I had learned to pay attention while being invisible. I listened to the conversations about business and real estate, and the specific texture of how financially successful people in Raleigh talked about deals and opportunities and risk. I was collecting something, though I did not yet know exactly what I was collecting or what I would do with it. I paid attention, and the attention was its own form of education, the kind you cannot get anywhere else. About 6 months in, something happened that changed the angle of my attention. Gerald Holloway was having a meeting at the house one evening, 3 men from his office, working through something on a project. I was in the kitchen preparing the drinks and the food they had asked for, and I was moving in and out of the dining room where they were working. And during one of my quiet trips through the room, I heard Gerald explain a real estate analysis concept to one of the younger men at the table. He explained it clearly in plain language. In about 90 seconds, the concept was something I had read about in one of the library books, a framework for evaluating the long-term value of a commercial property based on factors that were not visible in the current financials. I had read about it and understood it approximately. Hearing it explained out loud by someone who used it in actual practice made it real in a way the book had not quite managed. I went back to the kitchen. I wrote down what he had said in the small notebook I had started keeping in my pocket, the one I carried because I had discovered I was hearing things I wanted to remember. I wrote it down, and that night in my room, I read back what I had written, and I thought about it, and I understood it better than I had that afternoon. This is the moment I want to describe carefully, because it is the pivot. It is not a dramatic moment. There is no music. I am sitting on a twin bed in a room off the kitchen hallway in someone else's house, writing in a small notebook. Nothing about it looks important, but it is the moment I understood that I was in a place where people with real knowledge moved and spoke and made decisions, and that the knowledge they had was not magic. It was learned, the way all things are learned, through exposure and study and practice, and I was being exposed to it every single day. I was being paid to be in proximity to an education. The question was whether I was going to do something with the proximity. I did not make a plan overnight. I want to be clear about this because I think stories about people who build themselves up sometimes skip the period of decision-making and make it look like a switch was flipped. It was not a switch. It was a series of decisions, each one small, that accumulated over several months into a direction. The first decision was to apply for community college. I had not finished my college application process when I was forced out of my father's house. The financial aid form had never been completed. The applications had never been submitted. I applied in the spring to Wake Tech, which had a business administration program and evening classes and a cost that, with financial aid, I could manage on the salary I was saving because my living expenses were covered by the Holloways. The acceptance letter came to Ms. Eubanks's address because I had used the shelter as my mailing address and had not yet changed it. She called me and told me the letter had arrived and she was holding it for me. And when I came to pick it up, she handed it to me over her desk and looked at me over her bifocals in the way she looked at things she was assessing honestly. "You're taking classes," she said. It was not a question. "Starting in the fall," I said. She nodded once, the way people nod when something confirms what they expected. "Good," she said. The second decision was to tell Catherine Holloway. I did this because I needed her to know that my schedule on Tuesday and Thursday evenings would be different, and because I had decided, after months in her household, that she was a person who responded to directness with respect. I told her I was starting at Wake Tech in the fall, and that I would need those evenings. She looked at me for a moment in the particular assessing way she had. "Business administration," she said. "Yes," I said. "What do you want to do with it?" I had thought about this question enough to have an answer. "I want to work in real estate development," I said. "Eventually." She looked at me for another moment. Then she said, "The evenings are fine. I'll adjust the Thursday dinner schedule." That was all. She did not make a speech about it. She did not tell me she was impressed or offer encouragement. She adjusted the Thursday dinner schedule, which was its own kind of acknowledgement, the kind that a practical person makes when they have registered something worth registering. The first semester at Wake Tech was the hardest intellectual experience of my life, and I mean this as a compliment to myself because I survived it and came out better. I had been out of school for a year. I had been working in a physically and emotionally demanding job. I was taking classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings after full days of work, which meant I was studying on Sunday afternoons, and the 1 hour I had before sleep each night, and on my phone during any spare minute I could find. I was tired in a way that was constant, and had to be managed rather than resolved. I got a B in Introduction to Business, and an A- in English Composition, and a B in the economics course that I had expected to do better in, and that humbled me appropriately. I registered for the spring semester before the fall grades were even posted because I had decided that doubt was not a luxury I had time for. By the end of the first year, I had a 3.4 GPA and a clearer sense of what I was working toward. The real estate courses at Wake Tech were introductory, but they gave me a framework for the things I had been observing in Gerald Holloway's office and at his dinner table, and the frameworks made the observations more useful. I was building something. I could feel it, the way you feel a structure taking shape when you are assembling it piece by piece. Catherine Holloway asked me once, during my second year of classes, how school was going. We were in the kitchen. She was reviewing something on her tablet. I was finishing the morning routine. She asked without looking up, the way she asked things when she was paying more attention than her posture suggested. "It's going well," I said. "I'm thinking about transferring to NC State for the bachelor's program." She looked up from her tablet. "You've looked into it?" "I've looked into the real estate development concentration in the business school," I said, "and the application timeline." She looked at me in the way she had looked at me the first time I had told her about my plans, the assessing look, the one that I had come to understand meant she was recalibrating something. "Come talk to me this evening," she said, "after dinner." That conversation lasted an hour and a half. She asked me specific questions about my plans, the kind of questions that came from someone who had watched deals get made for 20 years and understood what the path from intention to execution actually required. She did not give me a speech or a mentorship moment. She asked questions and I answered them, and she asked follow-up questions and I answered those too. And by the end of it, I understood that she had been evaluating whether I had thought seriously about what I wanted or whether I was someone who had a feeling and called it a plan. I had thought seriously about it. She understood this by the end. 2 weeks later, she told me that a contact of hers at a commercial real estate firm in Raleigh was looking for an administrative assistant, entry level. Not glamorous, but in the field I wanted to be in. It would mean leaving here, she said. "I know," I said. "Gerald and I would write you a reference," she said. "A strong one," I looked at her. In 3 years I had not had a conversation with her that was about me, about my interests, about my future. "Why are you helping me?" I said. She considered this for a moment in the way she considered things that deserved a considered answer. "Because you did your job," she said. "And you didn't let doing your job be the only thing you did. I find that worth helping." I applied for the position. I got it. The next 3 years are the part of the story that is hardest to compress because they were full in a way that resists summary. Let me try. I took the administrative assistant job at Merit Commercial Properties, and I was, from the first week, the person at that firm who arrived earliest and left when the work was done, and who asked questions that revealed I understood more about the business than my job title explained. I was organized in a way that came from 3 years of managing a complex household to exacting standards, which turned out to be a transferable skill in ways I had not anticipated. Systems are systems. The Holloway household had taught me to build them and maintain them and troubleshoot them when they failed. And an office is a system. I transferred to NC State at 25, taking evening and online courses while working full-time. The financial aid was sufficient, and the scholarship I applied for in my second year, which was specifically for students who had demonstrated financial hardship and academic perseverance, covered a significant portion of the remaining cost. I wrote the personal essay for that scholarship in 4 drafts over 2 weeks, and it was the most honest writing I had done about my own history, about the kitchen window and the duffel bag and the twin bed off the kitchen hallway. And I wrote it without self-pity because the scholarship committee did not need my self-pity. They needed my story. I got the scholarship. At 26, I was promoted to a junior analyst position at Merit, which came with a salary that made my old checking account balance feel like a dream from someone else's life. I had a studio apartment in Raleigh that was mine, my lease, my furniture, my name on everything. I had a savings account. I had health insurance. At 27, I completed my bachelor's degree and attended the graduation ceremony alone, which is how I would have attended it anyway, because the only people I wanted to be there were Priya, who had moved to Charlotte for a job, and Ms. Eubanks, who came and sat in the audience in her bifocals and her good cardigan, and who found me after the ceremony and held both my hands and did not say anything, which was exactly right. I called Tamara, from whose couch I had started 5 years before, and told her I had graduated. She screamed into the phone. I laughed for the first time that day. Genuinely, the laugh that comes out when something is over and you're still standing. My father had texted me twice in 5 years, once on my birthday in year 2, a brief text that I answered briefly. Once in year 4, a longer message that said he thought about me and hoped I was okay. I had responded to both. I had not initiated contact. I did not have the specific feeling about this that I expected to have. Not rage, not grief, something more settled than either. The understanding that a door had been closed and that I had built a life that did not require it to reopen. The call came when I was 27, 3 months after graduation, from a recruiter I had met at an industry event the previous year. His name was David Park, and he worked with a regional commercial real estate investment firm that was expanding its Raleigh operations. The firm was called Cascade Capital, and it operated in the mid-market commercial space that I knew well from my years at Merritt. He said they had a position opening, associate-level real estate investment analysis, and that my name had come up in conversation with someone who knew my work. Who mentioned me? I said. There was a brief pause. Catherine Holloway, he said. She's on our advisory board. She said to call you specifically. I sat with this for a moment. Catherine Holloway, who had adjusted the Thursday dinner schedule when I told her I was starting at Wake Tech, who had asked questions sharp enough to assess whether I was serious, who had written me a reference I had never actually read because it went directly to the hiring manager. Catherine Holloway, who had said I find that worth helping and had apparently continued to find it worth helping for years after I left her household. I'm interested, I said. The interview process was 4 rounds. I prepared for all of them with the same thoroughness I had applied to everything since the twin bed in the back room, not frantically, not from a place of fear, but with the focused attention of someone who knows that preparation is the thing you can control when outcomes are not. I got the offer, senior to my current role, a salary that was. I sat with the number for a full minute when I read it. I accepted. Cascade Capital's Raleigh office was in a building on Fayetteville Street, glass and steel and the particular architecture of serious commercial real estate, the kind of building designed to communicate stability and permanence to the people doing business inside it. I walked in on my first day in November. I had dressed carefully, not excessively, not in the way of someone trying to perform confidence they do not have, but carefully, in the way of someone who understands that first impressions are real and who has specific things she wants to communicate about herself on a first day. Navy blazer, which I had bought the week before at a store I would not have been able to afford 4 years ago. Good shoes, my hair done the way I wear it when I want to feel prepared. I knew the building. This is the part one had not anticipated. I had been in this building before, not as an employee, but twice as a representative of Merritt, accompanying a senior analyst to a meeting with a client whose offices were on the 3rd floor. I had sat in the lobby both times waiting for the meeting to start, in the chair near the window, which was the same chair I could see from the entrance as I walked in now. I thought about that briefly, the version of me who had sat in that chair as the person who carried the senior analyst's files, and then I put it away because there was no use in it, and I had things to focus on. My new office was on the 6th floor. The elevator opened onto a reception area that had real plants and the particular hum of a workplace that takes itself seriously. The HR coordinator met me and walked me through the morning orientation, the badge, the systems access, the desk that would be mine, the introductions to the team. The team was 8 people. I shook hands and said names back to each person, the memory technique I had developed over years of needing to get things right the first time. At 11:30, there was a meeting in the 4th floor conference room, a new client presentation, and I had been told I would be sitting in to observe how the firm ran its client meetings before I was involved in leading them. I walked into that conference room with my notebook and my new badge and my navy blazer, and I took a seat on the analyst's side of the table. 3 minutes later, the door opened and the client party came in. I looked up from my notebook, standing in the doorway. In a group of 4 people was Patricia. She came in with 3 other people who I did not know, from a property development group that I had not been briefed on in detail before the meeting. She was talking to one of her companions as she walked in the way she always talked, with the particular authority of a woman who expects the room to be arranged to her preferences. She found a seat on the client side of the table. She arranged her things. She looked up as the room settled. She looked at me. I watched the not recognition on her face, the polite, blank attention of someone looking at a person they do not know in a professional setting. Her eyes moved across the table, registering the Cascade team, assessing the room. Then she looked at me again. The second look was different from the first. Slower, something catching, the way recognition works when it arrives against your expectation of it. I watched her work it out. I did not help her. The meeting opened. My colleague, a senior partner named James, made the introductions around the Cascade table. When he got to me, he said, "And this is our newest associate, Maya Collins, joining us from Merit Commercial, where she spent 3 years on investment analysis." Patricia was looking at me. I looked at her directly and I said, "Nice to meet everyone," in the voice I use in professional settings, which is clear and unhurried, and I opened my notebook. The meeting proceeded. It was a 2-hour meeting, substantive and detailed, and I was there to observe and take notes, and I did both. I asked one question near the end, a specific analytical question about the financing structure they were proposing, and the senior partner on the client side, not Patricia, a man named Henderson, answered it and then said, "Good catch," in the way experienced people say good catch when they mean it. Patricia was quiet for most of the meeting. I was aware of this without tracking it. She was, I understood from the dynamic in the room, not the primary decision maker in her group, more of a consultant, a connected party who had brought the deal to the table. She contributed occasional points. Her voice, when she spoke, was the voice I remembered. At the end of the meeting, when people were gathering their things, she appeared beside me. "Maya," she said. I looked at her. "Patricia," I said. The word landed differently than I had imagined it would. In the years when I had imagined this kind of encounter, I had imagined something more dramatic, a revelation moment, something that had the shape of a confrontation or a triumph. What I felt instead was something quieter. The specific satisfaction of having nothing to prove. "I didn't know you were in real estate," she said. "There's quite a bit you didn't know," I said. I said it without heat, just the fact of it. She was quiet for a moment. "Your father," she started. "I'll let you reach out to him directly if there's something to communicate," I said. She looked at me for another moment with the expression of someone recalibrating information they had stored incorrectly and are now correcting. "You've done well," she said. I looked at her in the navy blazer I had bought the week before, in the conference room on the 4th floor of a glass and steel building on Fayetteville Street, in the career I had built from a duffel bag and $43 and a twin bed off a kitchen hallway, and I said, "Yes, I have." I gathered my notebook. I shook hands with the client party in turn, as my colleagues were doing. I took the elevator back to the 6th floor. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. I started work. My father called me 3 weeks after that meeting. I do not know exactly what Patricia told him. I know she told him something because the call came, and because when he said my name, it had the quality of a man who has received information that has rearranged something. I answered. I had decided before the call came that I would answer if he called. Not because I had planned for the moment, but because I had done the work in therapy and in my own quiet thinking to understand that answering was not weakness and not capitulation. It was a choice made by someone who was no longer defined by what had happened in that kitchen, which is the only condition under which answering made sense. He said my name. "Hi, Dad," I said. A long pause, the kind of pause that has things in it. "Patricia told me she saw you," he said. "We were in a meeting together," I said. "She said you're doing well." A pause. "Really well, I am," I said. Another pause. I did not fill it. I had learned in the years since the kitchen window that not filling silences was a skill, that some silences deserve to be held rather than rushed through. "I've thought about you a lot," he said. "I know," I said. I did not know this for certain, but I said it because it was probably true. Because he is a man who loves his daughter in the incomplete and insufficient way he has always loved her. And love that is insufficient is still love. I had made my peace with the complicated truth of this. He asked if we could have dinner sometime. He said it carefully, in the way of someone who understands he does not have the standing to ask easily. I said, "Maybe, let me think about it." He said okay. He said he was proud of me. He said it in the voice of someone who understands they have forfeited significant amounts of the right to say it, and who is saying it anyway because it is true. I thanked him. We said goodbye. I put the phone down on my desk and I sat in my studio apartment, my apartment with my name on the lease and my furniture and the bookshelf I had assembled by myself with a YouTube tutorial, and I thought about the girl in the kitchen with the duffel bag and the $43. I have thought about her often over the years. Not with pity, which she would not have wanted, and not with the performed gratitude of someone who says they are thankful for their hard times because the hard times made them stronger. That framing has always bothered me. The hard times did not make me stronger. I made myself stronger, using the tools that were available to me in the conditions that were given to me. That is a different thing, and I want to say it correctly. What I want to tell you is what I actually believe, which is this. The version of me they had decided I was, the difficult daughter, the one with attitude, the one who had chosen her life, was a story other people told to make the thing they did more comfortable to live with. That story was never mine. I had refused, standing in the kitchen with my bag over my shoulder, to make it mine by accepting it. I had walked out of the door and into a parking lot in the dark, and into a shelter, and into a room off a kitchen hallway, and into a community college classroom on a Tuesday evening. And at every point what I carried with me was the refusal to be the story they had told. The blazer I wore to the Cascade meeting is hanging in my closet. I wear it sometimes when I want to feel prepared. The notebook I kept in my pocket at the Holloway house is in my desk drawer. I have kept every notebook from every period of those years, not as trophies, as evidence, not to show anyone, but to remind myself that the accumulation of small attentions is how large things get built. Ms. Eubanks retired 2 years ago. I went to the shelter's retirement dinner for her, and I sat at her table, and when they asked people to say a few words about her, I spoke last and longest, and I told the truth about what she had said to me when I was 22. It opens doors. Depends on what you do with what you learn in there. I told the room what I had done with what I learned in there. She looked at me over her bifocals in the way she looks at things she is assessing honestly. She nodded once. That was enough. That has always been enough, the honest nod of someone who knew what you were capable of before you fully knew it yourself, who pointed you toward the door and trusted you to open it. I opened it. I walked through. I built what was on the other side with my own 2 hands. The girl they looked down on became someone they never expected. But I expected her. I had been expecting her since the night I sat on the edge of a twin bed in a room off a kitchen hallway and said, out loud, to no one, "Okay."